And we are now on the air live.
Hello.
Should show up on our YouTube channel. There we are. I can share it out to Twitter.
Excellent. I'll be waiting to retweet it.
I have to change my Twitter account. I've got two of them, so that's the problem with being two people, being a business and being a writer.
Yeah. I've got a few. I haven't got. Actually, I've only got two at the moment. I've got one for my one I tweet about Warhammer, and my main one. I haven't got any more. Yeah. To be fair, some of the Warhammer tweets do tend to go into the main account as well. I'm incorrigible.
Yeah, I have a lot of crossover. Okay, I've tweeted it out to the main account, so we should be letting people know now that they're out. Of course, if they're subscribers, they got the notification.
Did you CC me on there, or?
I did not. I did not CC you on that. It's on the Critical Blast channel.
Cool.
And we have books in hand. Now, when I first reviewed the first issue of this, I was not grokking where you were going with this. The first 2 pages, I was like, well, okay, I know that Peter Cannon Thunderbolt was the archetype for Ozymandias in Watchmen, so it would make sense that he's going to act a little like Ozymandias. And then, like a couple pages in, I'm like, yeah, it's a little derivative. And by the end, I'm like, this is a balls-on, straight-up, take that Watchmen kind of rip-off thing boldly. I just couldn't express it well enough. I was like, yes, it's Watchmen, and they don't care, and that makes it cool. It's like, what happens if we kept going with this thing? But obviously, as you got further into it, you had something to say. And I was just curious, did they bring Peter Cannon to you? Did you bring the idea for Peter Cannon to them? How did this whole thing get started with what you wanted to do with this?
Well, I've been talking with Nick to do a series of them forever, really, and it's just never been the right time. And eventually it was like, okay, come on, let's do it now. Otherwise, I'm not doing much work for hire anymore. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to do work for hire, like I've said I'll do it forever. Let's do a book. And we just basically, Nick sent the big long list. Here's like a bunch of stuff we're doing. And this long list of like Dynamite sort of properties. And like Peter Cannon Thunderbolt was on there. And I was like, interesting. And he mentioned, of course, he actually kind of half mentioned Peter Cannon as well. So I have Watchmen issues to work through. So it's like, I always say I got into comics when I was 25. As in, I read them as a kid, but fell out as a teenager. And I got into comics properly when I was 25, which isn't quite true. I got into, because that implies I wasn't reading any comics. It's true. I got into Alan Moore, specifically Watchmen, and then other stuff, like at 21. So in other words, I got into comics when I was 25. I got into Alan Moore when I was 21. And those 4 years are kind of the point when I was really deeply into this form. And of course, it's like, how to phrase this? I'm not quite sure whether to most people they'll see how influenced by Alan I am, because one of the things I always took from Watchmen is the point of Watchmen was not to do Watchmen. The 9-panel grid is, all that kind of easy stuff. No, the Watchmen's about deep structuralism and deep structuralism from like the layout of panels and to other places. I mean, it's kind of like, I use the 8-panel grid at least to kind of like to explore that instead. As Watchmen is always inspiration rather than a role model. So I've got all that shit. I've got all that stuff going around my head, and I must admit, I am somewhat frustrated with the medium in some ways. And it's like, I don't really want to talk too much about Doomsday Clock. I'm not a fan, would be the short way of, like, in terms of its existence. As in, like, I question the industry and why we choose to do these things. And of course, I've got this weird head of steam behind me. And I was like, let's just, I'm processing it in a much more healthy way. Was where I came from. Because it's like, how to phrase this? If Watchmen taught us anything, like that's not quite true. If one of the lessons that Watchmen could have taught people is you can do any story you want with analogs. You know, by definition, you know, Watchmen started as originally the Charlton Heroes, and so actually no, you don't need to use the Charlton Heroes. You can spin it out and make it your own thing. So like literally the first lesson that Watchmen should teach us is if you want to make a real sort of quote unquote spiritual sequel to Watchmen, you would never use the Watchmen characters because Watchmen is designed to be perfectly the only real you know. For me, there is not a real artistic reason to use the Watchmen characters versus, you know, that leads down a completely different hole. So using an exploration of essentially, okay, I start there, then it's okay, let's talk about Watchmen's influence. Because, you know, it's like, it's not really a book that's kind of anti-Watchmen. It's kind of anti the idea that the industry has repeated Watchmen for 30 years. And of course, I am absolutely guilty in that, you know, that I'm basically doing it to the ultimate degree to sort of critique it. You know, by doing a story which basically takes this iconography of Watchmen and turns it again and again and again over. I can sort of like play with it and kind of dissect Watchmen a bit. Is kind of what we've been thinking. So
I like how you were stealing dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun. And the thing is, for me, it was like I took this sort of rough idea to Nick, and it was a bit like, "Are you sure this isn't too weird?" And I was actually, no, it is too weird. But I came back and I made it much more fun. You know, that's for me is very important, despite the fact, you know, we're doing this. The utter audacity of it is part is the fun of it, you know. That's just like I think, like, especially that first issue is like it's basically as in the whole thing is playful, and we get to the end, and you either laugh or you don't, and then we take it further on from there. But that kind of it's got to be fun seemed to me quite important in terms of like because it's one of my aesthetics is that kind of. Okay, you've asked one question and I've gone off like this. Seriousness is not the opposite. You know, being funny is not the opposite of being serious in that kind of way. Like, you know, you can be utterly meaningful. Somber is the opposite of funny. I can be making jokes whilst being deadly serious. These are kind of like that's always been my aesthetic. As in, I tried to make something fun whilst also going for the throat. So that's kind of what's in the heart of it. Does that answer the question? It may answer all the questions.
It may answer all the questions, but we'll just build off from there. You talked about the structure that was in Watchmen, and everyone, when they talk about the structure in Watchmen, they go to the 9-panel grid. I got truly deep into Watchmen when I was in college, but really got down the rabbit hole several years later when I was reading Stuart Moulthrop's essays on the story. He was actually teaching a class, and one of the things that came out of there was if you look at the Rorschach chapter, that's not the 9-panel grid, although there's some in there. But if you lay it out on the center of the book, where there's the big, it's where Adrian Veidt has taken the guy down.
Yeah, the inversion. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you lift those 2 pages up, and you just hold them like this, and you look at what's down there. The panels and the pages that you see there parallel each other in structure and character and action, and it does that through the whole book as you do that. And I was just blown away by the fact that that was such a subtle subliminal thing that people wouldn't pick up on right away, but it's just one of the many different structures that was in the book.
Oh, it's magical. Yeah, I mean, fearful symmetry is one of those kind of virtuosic moments. So I've actually, like, if anyone's listening hasn't heard it, I did a speech about Watchmen, which if you Google up Kieron Gillen Watchmen speech, you'll find it. It's me basically talking about that kind of stuff for like about an hour, in fact. And for me, it was like, my origin story, as I said, I got into Alan when I was 21. As I was taking Watchmen, I was basically living in America in a room without a television and like just a copy of Watchmen and some existentialist books. And I was too depressed to read the philosophy. So I basically read Watchmen like 8-9 times in that week. And that was kind of my origin. As in, you know, I studied Watchmen from the off, and I was instantly rereading and seeing more stuff than rereading. And that's kind of like, that's my Rosetta Stone when I try, you know, when I'm trying to do comics. That's always kind of, I write comics to be reread. And that kind of comes from that initial toxic exposure to Watchmen.
So when they came to you and said, you know, hey, we have Peter Cannon Thunderbolt. And first of all, I don't even know if you'd be the person to ask this or if it'd be somebody higher up at Dynamite, but how did they get Peter Cannon Thunderbolt? Because as I recall, DC Comics had bought all the Watchmen characters and were going to use them until they saw what Alan was going to do. And they're like, oh, no, we want to keep using them, but we like this story. So Is he like co-owned now, or
as far as he's licensed, the family, as in the family of Murasi, are the owners of Peter Cannon, and they've licensed it to Dynamite. I'm not quite sure how on earth. I must admit, I'm not exactly sure the details of why the Murasi managed to keep his rights to Peter Cannon. Because that's the other thing that always kind of interested me about Thunderbolt, in terms of like, oh yeah, there's not many 1960s superheroes who the creator's estate owns it, you know?
yes,
So the idea that Peter Cannon somehow escaped the corporate structure is quite exciting. That's like, Mr. Miracle never managed to escape DC, but like Peter Cannon managed to find a way out of DC, which is kind of cool.
absolutely. I love what Dynamite does with all the characters that have fallen in the public domain, where they're just showing up all over the place, and not even saying continuities.
Is that the thing? I love all riffing on public domain stuff I like a lot. But of course, Peter Cannon isn't that either. He's literally owned by the estate. So in other words, Murasi's like estate will earn money from this, which is quite exciting, I think.
Yeah, he's like Tarzan. He's the Burroughs estate still keeps him. So you had your own sort of you had different teams that showed up throughout the book here, and the first one was, of course, on the original Peter Cannon world, and of course there's multiple Earths that we go through in here. Where did you what did you draw from to come up with some of these characters? Because somebody like the Test is just the most bizarre thing. It was like a Brother Power character to me, only more insane.
That's funny. I started when I was building the teams. My thinking was I wanted to make them analogs for multiple people at once. So like, you can sort of see obviously it's called the Test, so you think, oh, he must be Rorschach, and yada yada. So on some level it's that, but the other level is I'm also wanting to make them analogs. In this case, the Avengers, in that kind of like, so the whole team there's a kind of the Iron Man one and the Captain American one and the I forget who else is in there, the Hulk one even. The Black Widow one, and the case of the Test is kind of the Team Loner analog. So his major influence is in fact Wolverine, as in he's a guy with guns for hands. So instead of having claws for hands, we've got guns for hands, and you mash that to, and I was playing with that idea, and then it made me thinking about someone like Deadpool, and that kind of, and then it made me think about how if you get someone like The Question or Rorschach who have this very hardcore philosophy. Okay, let's choose a different philosophy. Let's make him believe in absurdity. So in other words, have someone who believes, I mean, like, so I took so those all those ideas mashing together, trying to create its own kind of novel thing in between them all. That was kind of the goal. So me and Casper were talking about these kind of, I wrote these big documents. I said, how about this? And I throw ideas, and then he developed it and made it his own in that way. So yeah, that's kind of the idea. I mean, part of me, it's quite important not to just do the analog, but also kind of do a kind of like your own. You hear something that is genuinely novel existing at the meniscus of this. Like I think there's a tendency in comics to use analogs just as pure commentary on what they are, instead of like necessarily turning it into their own thing. So the idea that there was something soft in there about, originality versus inspiration versus where you choose to take it next, because it's all kind of a metabolic process of creativity, I think.
Well, it was this first issue just had a ton of action here, where the aliens are invading, the city's being wiped out, and then of course he tells them it was almost like a Karate Kid moment, Legionnaire's Karate Kid, where he identifies weak spots. Or who's that guy in the Inhumans who does the same thing? He's like, right there, that ship right there, hit that crack. And
I love Colnick, yeah.
But and then they all like, okay, we won, we're going home, and Peter Cannon's telling Taboo, that I did this, I caused this, and I'm thinking, okay, well that's exactly where we were with Watchmen. He caused it. But then we get to this denouement here, where we see there's an Antarctic fortress, and here is a guy watching these grids of televisions, and I'm like, oh my God, he's not seriously going to do it. And it's not Adrian Beat, but it is definitely a Peter Cannon who is doing everything that Adrian Beat did in the original Watchmen, right down to the very Ramses II style of throne and trying to destroy worlds, but with an entirely different reason. And what was his reason, by the way? Anyway, he's just kind of doing it here to be the bad guy.
It's kind of like he believes that it's kind of like, how to phrase this? In the sense, Veidt was the idea. Veidt is an end versus the mean. So end justifies the mean supervillain. Veidt was always the idea that, you know, it doesn't. Okay, I'll make this disaster, and as long as I make the world lead to utopia, it's okay. You know, yeah, obviously it's awful. I'd rather not do it, but you know, this is the best. And this is the idea. You know, for me, Veidt was. My reading of Watchmen is that I think Veidt is messed up. You know, I think all the way through, if you take Watchmen's deep structure, the implication, I mean, the fact it's literally the stupidest person who now has the fate of the universe in his hands. And of course, the structure of the book is based around the pirate stories. So the pirate story tells somebody who believes that they're going to save it. They have to do this awful thing to save their village, and they get there and discover it's never been for them at all. You know, and the threat wasn't as real as they thought it was, and all he's done is killed some people and doomed himself. And of course, you know, Veidt, pretty much the last thing Veidt says he talks about dreaming of a black ship. You know, for me, Watchmen is pretty. The implication of Watchmen is, oh no, Veidt's messed up. You know, this is gonna like the necessary momentum of Watchmen for me takes me to there. Other people disagree, but that was my take. So the cut take is, okay, Veidt is messed up. Let's say the entire world dies in nuclear war. In which case, like, how on earth can he not kill himself? And it's like, well, okay, there's a multiverse. So if I manage to basically make this plan work on other dimensions, it means that all those other deaths are justified. So if I can make up this plan and make it work somewhere and make it work in enough more universes than I do, I've actually, on average, I'm better. Of course, that leads to the place where he is the most of this story, where he's just doing awful things now because he knows it doesn't matter what I do. If I just kill around one person, if I save like the rest of existence, doesn't matter, does it? So like he's well off the deep end. So that's my kind of thinking. And of course, that's like me talking about the recapitulation of Watchmen, thinking it's going to lead anywhere else new and interesting. And, you know, like if you just chew over Watchmen in a self-recursive way, it by definition will not lead anywhere. That's kind of my take. Yeah,
I had a high hope, I guess, when Doomsday Clock came out, largely because I had jumped off the end of Watchmen years ago when Jonathan tells Veidt, you know, it's like I've become interested in human life again. I think I'm going to go create some. And he goes into the little globe of cosmos there that we see. And I was reading comic books in kindergarten. It got me promoted a grade in reading because I was picking up all these things. So I was definitely reading all the old Silver Age stuff. And I had this crazy, wild idea that what if that light blue glowing hand that grabbed everything in the beginning of the DC universe in Green Lantern 40 was Osterman entering the universe and creating the DC universe. And I was like, boy, that'd be really cool if they did that. And I thought when Doomsday Clock came out, I was like, oh my God, they're going to go with my idea. But it's just another multiverse. It's just one of many, many, many that apparently the Watchmen universe is a part of. So,
I haven't actually read like any part of Doomsday Clock. Actually, I've read a couple of pages just because they've turned up on news sites. But it's kind of like, as you know, I know Alan, so it's like kind of like out of loyalty to Alan, I will not be reading it. Is the best way of putting it. You know, as in like because that is a personal thing. There means I just stay clear.
Yeah, well, it's to me, it's been one of those things where if you skip the first 9 issues and then read the last 3, that's when everything happens anyway. Because it's been really, really slow. And my thought is that DC and Jeff Johns are mimicking and mirroring the original Watchmen to such a degree that they've even copied the publication schedule from the 80s so that we get months and months now in between these last couple of issues. I think that's on purpose because...
I have sympathy for any, like, obviously Dave has got the last few issues of Wick and Divine are taking their time coming out, and it's like a variety of things have happened, mainly Jamie's health situation. So I have sympathy because I know I'm very aware of how things can go wrong.
They do all the time.
Imagine how frustrating it is.
Okay, so are you doing any convention tours?
I am. San Diego is like a tour is too much. I'm going to go to San Diego. I've got a book coming out through Boom like in August called Once and Future, which is
I love the title.
It's good. It's basically about a grandson discovering his grandmother who raised him is actually a retired monster hunter and being basically dragged into the family business. And it's on the background of all Arthurian myth and a lot of so it's basically a lot of Arthurian myth as horror story. So that's kind of the vibe. It's like, it's got like that kind of Indiana Jones energy. It's supposed to got a little bit of like Buffy as grandmother energy to it. Dan Motter's doing the art and it looks amazing. Anyway, they're taking me over there because it's obviously just before it comes out. I'm probably doing New York. I'm not 100% sure about New York Con yet, but like I would like to do it because I think the last week in Divine Trade is like the week before it or maybe the week or two before it. So like it'll be a good time to go over and have a wake basically.
Sure.
But like I don't think I'm doing any more American tours. I might be doing Worldcon in Dublin, as in on the whole science fiction side of it, which would be fun. And Thought Bubble at the end of the year, which is like always my favourite con in the UK.
Well, at some point, one of these conventions, you're going to run into 9 people who are going to go to the parking lot and lay down and make a grid, because it's just great that might work.
Yeah. So literally, I love anyone who does like the really ornate cosplay. I did some characters called we did 1923 Wickdiv. We had three even 1923 Norns. They were basically Orwell, Huxley, and Wells as kind of like young people in killer suits, and two of them killed the other one in the story, and have like some of the cosplays come up and they just come as 2 people, and I'm like, oh, it would be so cool if they got the third one. Then I realised they've got blood splattered up their legs. Because in the comic, they stamp the other one to death. So in other words, it's like, if you know the comic, you know, oh no, I know exactly what scene this is. And I know why the third one is in there, which I thought was very cool.
That's attention to detail there. Now it was, I can't recall if it was issue 3 or 4, but suddenly you change genre.
Yeah.
And you're in a black and white autobiographical comic book. Where were you going? Where are you going with this? Because I love that there was a Watchmen team in this non-superhero universe that just accepted Peter Cannon's word for, oh, okay, aliens are coming in, you're a superhero, want a beer?
Yeah, seems like a nice bloke, you know. I was kind of, you've read to the end, so the basic structure of Peter Cannon is it's like we go through these kind of superhero like homages and we talk about Watchmen's influence in the superhero genre, and then kind of I want to put a completely different angle on Watchmen because, Alan Moore, obviously, we talk about the British invasion, but we don't really think about that. British invasion means people who invade come from somewhere. And Alan was part of the British small press scene. Alan, if you read Eddie Campbell, who is the main influence on that issue, if you read Eddie Campbell's comics, he's in those comics. And, they're also in 9-panel grids. They're all, in other words, Eddie and Alan are peers. So the idea of saying, okay, what other stuff was happening alongside Watchmen? And so instead of thinking about Watchmen as like an American superhero comic, think about it as a British indie comic. The idea, and these things are probably closer to Watchmen, and I would say Watchmen and the Alec books are closer together than Watchmen and most American superhero comic books, because they're really coming from a similar place of like psychological realism, etc., etc. So part of me was like trying to, don't just think about Watchmen as a superhero comic. Think about it as a like a band, a band who came from somewhere. But also in terms of the larger structure of the issue, it's like the way that Peter defeats evil Thunderbolt in the final issue is that he's learned stuff from those indie comics. And for me, it's like you take, as a creator and as a creative, you are inspired from other places. You see other creators, and anything which is basically too, the inbreeding. If you only select from a small number of things, that's vulnerable. And like for me, the exciting thing about comics is there's so many different places you can explore. So the idea that Peter Cannon goes to somewhere else and realizes, oh no, because he thinks he's the hot, really the smart guy, and it's like, well, if you think you're as good as it gets, by definition, you're not going to get any better. So that kind of like Peter Cannon essentially realizing, oh no, there's so many things I should learn from. And that's kind of like that's the journey for Peter, is eventually realizing, yeah, he's pretty good. It's not good enough. And that allows him, and the lessons he's learned, as in the techniques, which evil Peter Cannon doesn't actually know, allows him to win in the end. And that's kind of what's the idea, by going somewhere completely different. A, talks about Watchmen in this way, and B, allows Peter Cannon to go on a journey.
I love how you said he learned things from different comic books, because whenever Peter Cannon has to attack a problem, he goes downstairs and reads. And it's too late now to do this because he was doing the scrolls, but I would have loved if he'd gone down there with just long white boxes that he had to thumb through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of if I did that, I think it'd probably been okay. The whole comic's a bit too much, but like that's definitely the metaphor. Like it's like you read Hicksville, Hicksville by Dylan I've got Dylan Horrocks. Hicksville is an amazing New Zealand black and white indie comic, and it's basically got the idea that there's this small town in New Zealand where basically there's a library, and the library has every single comic which every creator wanted to make, and the industry wouldn't let them. So you've got kind of like all those kind of you've got like all the stuff that Kirby would have done if he had complete freedom down there. And it's an incredibly sad and powerful comic actually, and if you haven't read it, you would love it. And kind of like I half imagine downstairs at Peter Cannon's place a bit like that. As in the idea, these are the scrolls of possibility, and that's the kind of the idea of like somebody who goes and reads and thinks about it, and then goes and tries to make something else. That's kind of like, as I said, I like the cycle of creatives, of like how this chain of creatives, and the relay race of culture, I guess. That's a bad metaphor. Excuse me.
Well, I got when I did get to the end of it, and things kind of went into the anticlimax, I was left with one question, and does Peter Cannon know he's in a comic book?
Ooh. I'm not sure about that. It's one of those kind of like you could there's I think it's kind of a Schrodinger's cat situation almost. Yeah. As in there is definitely a tension that Peter Cannon is aware of the medium he's in. But I don't think he sees being in a comic book like we would see being in a comic book. It's kind of like the classic Grant Morrison and in fact Warren Ellis.
Exactly where I was going with the Animal Man stories that he did.
Yeah, and so like I don't think them like if we, there's all those. Okay, this is a Warren Ellis thing. The idea and a lot of science have kind of riffed on this. Sorry, it's Warren Ellis riffing on science and the idea of the universe being entirely flat, really, and the actual. So in other words, we actually are on a flat, hyperdense information strip. And that's kind of true, but to us, it doesn't matter. Our lives feel real. In the same way, for me, I think Peter Cannon is very aware that he is in a structure like this, but that it doesn't read as a quote-unquote comic book any more than us living in a two-dimensional information plane feels like we're living in a two-dimensional plane. All it is basically the existence we live in, I guess. That's how I kind of sort of see it, because and obviously, I love everything Grant did with the medium, and I love the I can see you. The I can see you moment in Animal Man is amazing. But all those kind of things, it's like I didn't want to just repeat them. I mean, there's a lot of like medium playing with stuff, but that for me wasn't the core of the book. The core of the book was the idea that it is about the medium of comics, and Cannon swims through it. Like does a fish know it's in water? Only when he gets took out of it. Is that kind of like that metaphor?
Yeah, exactly. Like in Flatland when the line segment gets lifted out. Then he can see down and realize that he was in something that he didn't realize what kind of environment it was until he saw it from the outside. So this is a fairly complete story. I mean, there's no cliffhangers. There's nothing else to be done, which kind of makes it difficult to ask, is there going to be more Peter Cannon in our future?
I've got no present plans. I've thought the joke is that we should make an entirely unauthorized prequel. That someone else write, and I get very angry on the internet. I've got no. I planned it like 5 issues. It was always going to be like I'm going to go in. I've got a statement to make. I think this is the story I want to tell, and it's just I left some if Dynamite wanted to pick up and run with the Peter Cannon, there's some stuff I left in there for them, and I kind of deliberately it's stuff like. In the last couple of pages, I sort of say, okay, this is how you would get back the team. That kind of like, you wouldn't bring them, resurrect them, But you would get like, here's some cool new takes on these characters you can run with. So that's kind
Plus,
of.
it wouldn't even have to be that Peter Cannon. You've got so many of them. Just pick a different one to a superhero universe.
So I don't know what Dynamite have got planned or if they want to do something, but like I certainly wouldn't object to them playing with it. But I found it incredibly exciting book to do. Is that I'm trying to work. My schedule's really busy, but I would love to do another book with Casper and Mary and Hassan. Is that kind of like, oh yeah, there was an energy here. So doing something in style like Peter Cannon, but not Peter Cannon. As in like use the lessons we've learned and take him somewhere else.
Yes,
I think that's more likely. But as I said, I would not object, and I would love to see what someone else did with the character.
I would love to see something where you've got someone like the Clock Crew, who are just these blokes in a bar that have to deal with things like alien invasions and monsters from the sewers. And they're like, we have no clue what we're doing here, but you know what? We'll just take care of things and then go back and get another drink.
I feel like the incredibly the Avengers who were just into getting the next round, as in we've got to defend we've got to save the world before closing time. That's what I kind of loved about it, is in like that exploring those kind of ideas on an even wider kind of like piece of paper. So yeah, worth stressing, I've got no firm plans or anything, but it's that kind of like it's nagging at me, as in, oh yeah, this was such a cool book to do. So like trying to do something that's scratched a similar itch in a different way, that would be cool.
All right, so where do you go from here before we wrap up, and we'll let you go?
I am Wiccan Divine. Last couple of issues are coming out, which is like 5 years mission finishing. My last Star Wars issue comes out on Wednesday, so that's like end of an era. That's my last work for hire at the moment. My comic Die, the first trade's just come out, as in Die Fantasy Heartbreaker, available in all good comic shops.
I was told by a friend on the internet that if you came into this chat with a pair of 20-sided dice and asked me if I wanted to play a different kind of game, I was to run screaming.
That is wise. Honestly, like stay clear from me and dice at the moment. Oh, and we come back with the next issue of that in August as well. So pick up the trade, jump aboard in August. I've also just released an RPG beta of that, which is free online, so that's downloadable. And I mentioned Once and Future, and Once and Future will be coming out in August.
Fantastic. We're going to look for all of that. All right, Kieron, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and I apologize for all the setup problems we went through. Learned some more things, and every time I do one of these things, I learn something not to do the next time.
Yes, I know the feeling. Right, I'll catch you later, mate.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.